I always imagined that holidays were meant for warmth and laughter, for the scent of cinnamon and pine, for the comfort of knowing that, no matter how unpredictable the world became, family would be there for you. But last winter, as Christmas lights blinked in the windows of my old brownstone in Boston, I found myself alone for the first time in 33 years. It was not the kind of solitude that I once craved after a long week in the city, nor the gentle quiet of a snow day spent reading on the couch. This loneliness felt different. It was sharp, almost metallic, with a heaviness that settled in my chest and refused to let me breathe freely. Outside, the city was transformed by a fresh layer of snow, turning the brownstones along Marlborough Street into something almost storybook perfect. Every stoop was crowned with a wreath, and every window flickered with the glow of tiny white bulbs. I watched couples arm in arm hurry to dinner parties, children dragging sleds down the icy sidewalks, friends calling out greetings in the brisk December air. There was joy all around me, but I felt strangely invisible, as though I were standing on the other side of a glass wall. The world was celebrating, and I was just an observer. I suppose I should have seen this coming. My family had always been complicated, though I tried for years to pretend otherwise. My mother, Patricia, was a woman of grand gestures and elaborate expectations. My father, David, lived in her shadow, offering little more than quiet agreement or the occasional warning that never seemed to amount to action. My younger brother, Tyler, was the golden child, full of reckless charm and relentless demands. Growing up in Philadelphia, I learned early that my role was to hold things together, to be the responsible one, to ensure the bills were paid, birthdays were remembered, and disappointments were quietly endured. It wasn't until I moved to Boston for college, and later built a career as a marketing consultant, that I realized how much of my life had been shaped by the weight of my family's needs. I landed my first big client at 25, a luxury retail brand based in New York, and, almost overnight, the people who had always dismissed my ambitions suddenly saw me as their ticket out of struggle. I was initially proud to be able to help. Paying for Tyler's tuition at Penn State, covering my parents' mortgage payments when Dad was between jobs, buying extravagant Christmas gifts when my savings were barely enough to cover rent in Back Bay. Each check I wrote felt like proof that I was doing the right thing, that I belonged. But generosity, I've learned, can become a trap. What began as small gestures of love slowly evolved into something darker, a pattern of expectation, then entitlement, and eventually resentment. I tried to draw boundaries, but my mother's disappointment cut deeper than any argument with a stranger. She had a way of sighing, of reminding me of all the sacrifices she had made, of asking, "Don't you want your brother to have what you never did?" Guilt was a familiar feeling, something that seemed almost encoded in my DNA. The real fracture came last Christmas. I remember the phone call as if it happened yesterday, Patricia's voice soft and coaxing at first, then tight with irritation when she realized I was not going to agree easily. "Julia, Tyler deserves something special this year," she said, her words tumbling out in a practiced cadence. "He's had such a hard semester, and you know how much he's always wanted a Tesla. Just put it on your card for now, okay? You can afford it." I stared at the spreadsheet on my laptop, numbers blurring. A new Tesla costs more than $70,000. I tried to laugh it off, thinking she must be joking, but her tone made it clear she wasn't. My mother had never been good at hiding her true intentions. There was always a layer of manipulation beneath the surface, a sense that her children's successes belonged to her. It never occurred to her that my support should have limits. "Mom, that's a lot of money," I managed, my throat tight. "I can't just." "You're always so negative, Julia," she snapped. "You're doing so well in Boston, working with all those big clients. Don't pretend you can't afford it. Tyler's your brother. This is what family does." For years, I would have caved, just to avoid the guilt. I would have found a way to make the payments work, to prioritize their happiness over my own. But something inside me snapped. Maybe it was the exhaustion from another sleepless week at work, or the growing awareness that I was the only one sacrificing. Maybe it was the way Tyler's demands had escalated every year, never once accompanied by gratitude. Whatever it was, I found myself saying no. "I'm sorry, Mom. I can't do it. Not this time." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. Then she hung up. I stood in my kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator filling the space, and waited for the storm I knew was coming. Sure enough, within an hour, my phone vibrated with messages from Tyler, alternating between guilt trips and outright anger. "Are you kidding me? After everything I've done for you? Nice to know who matters to you. Don't bother showing up for Christmas if you can't even do this one thing." My father, as usual, stayed silent, his loyalty always tied to keeping the peace, which usually meant siding with my mother. By the end of the week, my phone was quieter than it had been in years. No calls, no messages, no invitations to family Zooms. I checked social media and saw that I had been quietly removed from the family group chats. It was as if I'd been erased. At first, I tried to tell myself that I would enjoy the break. I decorated my apartment with twinkling lights, baked gingerbread cookies, and wrapped gifts for my colleagues at work. I made a playlist of classic Christmas songs and let them play on repeat while I cleaned and organized closets I'd been neglecting all year. I even bought a small fir tree from the lot down the block, carrying it up 3 flights of stairs and stringing it with ornaments I'd collected over the years, some from Paris, a few from London, most picked up during business trips where I'd always tried to bring a little of the world back home. But no matter how hard I tried to fill the space, the emptiness lingered. I kept waiting for my mother to call, for Tyler to send a begrudging apology, for my father to break his silence and remind me that things would be all right. None of it happened. Instead, I spent Christmas Eve curled up on my sofa, the city outside muffled by falling snow, the only sound in the apartment the soft ticking of the radiator. The loneliness was profound, deeper than I expected. On Christmas morning, I woke to sunlight filtering through frosted windows, the city eerily quiet. I made coffee, opened a card from my neighbor down the hall, and tried to feel grateful for the peace. But gratitude and grief are complicated companions. I thought about my childhood, about holidays spent crowded around a too-small table, laughing over burnt pies and mismatched ornaments. I wondered if I had lost that forever, or if I was finally free from a cycle that was slowly destroying me. That day, I bundled up and walked through the snow to the public garden, watching as the ducks waddled across the frozen pond and children threw snowballs beneath the stately branches of ancient elms. There was a bittersweet beauty in the city's stillness, a sense that life was moving forward, with or without me. I breathed in the cold air and let myself feel the pain and the possibility in equal measure. Maybe this Christmas was meant to be different. Maybe it was the beginning of something I couldn't yet understand. As I trudged home, cheeks stinging with wind and tears, I promised myself that next year would not look the same. I would not let guilt or fear dictate my life anymore. If family meant sacrificing my happiness, perhaps it was time to redefine what family truly meant. For the first time in a long time, I felt the faintest flicker of hope. New Year's Day always feels like it should be a clean slate, a crisp, bright morning filled with possibilities, with the promise that maybe this year will be different. That's what I told myself as I padded across my cold kitchen floor, wrapped in an oversized flannel shirt, clutching a chipped mug of Earl Grey. The world outside my window was washed in pale winter sunlight, the streets below still and silent, as if the entire city of Boston was sleeping off the hangover of another passing year. I was trying, really trying, to hold on to hope. The ache of Christmas had faded to a dull bruise, replaced by a strange sense of calm. I had spent the week quietly, reorganizing drawers, making elaborate dinners for one, letting the days unfold at their own pace. I even allowed myself to imagine that I might be okay, that perhaps solitude wasn't something to be feared, but embraced. I had my health, my home, my career. I could build something new. But the universe has a way of testing your resolve at the moment you most need a break. That morning, my mailbox was stuffed with the usual assortment of holiday cards and bills, catalogs I'd never subscribed to, and a heavy, official-looking envelope stamped with the bold, blue Chase Bank logo. At first, I didn't think much of it. Maybe it was a new card offer or an annual update. I set it aside while I rinsed dishes and scrolled through half-hearted New Year's texts from friends. It was only when I finally slit the envelope open, the paper shaking in my hands, that I felt the first stirrings of unease. The letter inside was coldly formal, all business and no compassion. The words swam on the page, but the message was unmistakable. I owed more than $15,000 on a credit card I had never opened. I blinked, confused, reading and rereading the letter. My name was at the top, Julia Ellis, but the account number didn't match any card I had. The list of purchases made my stomach twist, a series of high-end electronics from an Apple store in Philadelphia, airline tickets booked to Miami, and a $4,000 charge at a luxury department store I had never set foot in. There were gift cards, jewelry, and even a hotel stay over Christmas week. Every line item felt like a punch to the gut. For a moment, I wondered if it was some kind of scam or clerical error. Maybe someone with the same name had accidentally triggered the wrong account. But as I scanned the statement, my heart sank. The shipping addresses all pointed to my parents' home in Philadelphia, the one I grew up in, the place that still haunted my dreams. I could almost see the packages stacked in their entryway, Tyler grinning as he tore into the boxes, Patricia overseeing it all, orchestrating Christmas as if nothing had changed. My mind reeled. I grabbed my laptop, logged into my credit report, and felt the blood drain from my face. There it was, an inquiry from Chase, an account opened less than 2 months ago. The email associated with the account was my own, but I had never set it up. Someone had all my personal information. Someone had pretended to be me. The panic rose in waves, first confusion, then fear, and finally, a deep, searing anger. I called the number on the letter, my voice shaking, and waited on hold as holiday music looped in the background. When I finally reached a representative, I stumbled through my explanation, the words tumbling out in a rush. Identity theft, I said. Fraud. I did not open this account. I did not make these purchases. The woman on the line was patient and kind, but her calm professionalism only made me feel more exposed. She asked me a series of questions: my birth date, my mother's maiden name, my last 5 addresses, and then she said something that made my blood run cold. Ms. Ellis, this account was opened online. The application includes a digital signature that matches the one we have on file for your other accounts. And there is an authorized user listed, Patricia Ellis. Is that your mother? My hands went numb. I managed to say yes, and the rest of the call blurred together. She explained the next steps. I would need to file a police report, freeze my credit, and submit a fraud affidavit. She apologized for my trouble and wished me luck. The call ended with the same cheery hold music, but nothing felt the same. I sat there for a long time, staring at the papers, the numbers. I thought about all the little ways my family had chipped away at my trust, the casual dismissals, the endless requests for money disguised as help. I remembered the way my mother would lecture me about loyalty, the way Tyler would roll his eyes when I hesitated to pay for another vacation or concert ticket. I had always believed that, deep down, they loved me, that they would never truly hurt me. Now, confronted with their betrayal in black and white, I saw the truth. I needed to confront them. Not with a phone call this time, but with facts. I took screenshots of every charge, printed the letter, and drove myself into the city for the first time since Christmas. My parents' house in Philadelphia was exactly as I remembered: red brick, white shutters, a wreath on the door that looked expensive, probably purchased with money stolen from me. My hand shook as I rang the bell. Patricia answered, surprised to see me but quick to compose herself. She wore her favorite silk robe, her hair swept up, the picture of calm authority. Julia, what are you doing here? I held up the letter. Can we talk? Now. We sat in the living room, the same room where I had opened Christmas gifts as a child, where every photo on the mantel was carefully arranged to tell a story of unity and joy. But that was all a lie. Tyler slouched on the couch, phone in hand, barely looking up. My father hovered in the kitchen, pretending to be busy. I laid out the evidence, my voice steady even as my heart pounded. Someone opened a credit card in my name. $15,000 in charges, all sent here. Mom, your name is listed as an authorized user. Did you do this? For a moment, Patricia didn't answer. She smoothed her robe, met my eyes, and shrugged, as if I had asked about the weather. You always said family comes first, Julia. We needed it for Tyler. You're so selfish. You make so much money and act like we're a burden. My brother snorted. You ruined Christmas, you know. You act like you're the only one with problems. Maybe if you weren't so uptight, we wouldn't have to go behind your back. My father didn't look at me. He muttered, just get over it. It's done now. The words echoed through me, sharp and cutting. For the first time, I saw them as they truly were: manipulative, ungrateful, willing to destroy my future for their comfort. All those years I spent sacrificing, giving, justifying their behavior. It had never been about love, it had always been about control. I felt something harden inside me. Maybe it was the realization that I couldn't fix this, that I could no longer be the one who made everything better. I gathered my things, stood, and looked at each of them in turn. You crossed a line. I'm not your bank. I'm not your scapegoat. This ends now. Patricia rolled her eyes, already dismissing me. You'll come around. You always do. I knew, as I walked out into the cold, that I would never go back. Something fundamental had shifted, and there was no way to unsee the truth. The city lights shimmered as I drove back to Boston, my heart aching and my mind racing. There would be police reports, calls to lawyers, and more sleepless nights. But I felt, for the first time, a glimmer of resolve. I would protect myself, no matter what it took. The old ties had been severed, and I was finally ready to build something new, from the ashes, perhaps, but stronger than before. After the confrontation in my parents' living room, I drove back to Boston feeling raw and exposed, as if every nerve in my body had been left unguarded in the cold. There was no rush of relief, only a strange emptiness, mingled with a growing sense of resolve. I kept replaying the conversation over and over: my mother's dismissiveness, Tyler's mockery, my father's studied silence. For the first time, their words did not twist me into knots of guilt or second-guessing. Instead, they made me certain that I could not let this go. This was bigger than a single argument or a moment of hurt. This was years of financial abuse, gaslighting, and emotional blackmail that had to end now. That night, alone in my kitchen, I paced back and forth, my phone heavy in my hand. I had no idea where to start. The idea of legal action seemed intimidating, almost impossible. It was one thing to get angry, but quite another to file police reports, hire a lawyer, and drag your own family into court. I hesitated, but every time I thought about letting it go, I pictured my mother's face, the utter lack of remorse, the certainty that I would always cave. I realized that if I did nothing, they would do it again. If not to me, then to someone else. That thought propelled me forward. The next morning, I sat at my desk and did what I do best: research. I pored over articles about identity theft and financial fraud. I learned the difference between civil and criminal cases, read about statutes of limitations, and the rights of victims. The more I read, the less alone I felt. There were others out there who had taken similar steps and survived. Their stories became a quiet encouragement. It took several days for me to find the right attorney. I made a list, called offices, left voicemails, and tried not to sound desperate. The legal jargon was overwhelming, and each conversation forced me to recount the most painful details of my family's betrayal. I felt exposed, but with each retelling, it became easier to say the words aloud. When I finally connected with Samuel Grant, I felt a sliver of hope. Samuel was calm and direct. He listened without judgment, letting me talk until I ran out of words. "Julia," he said after a long pause, "what you're describing is more common than you think. But it's not okay. You deserve justice, and you have options. Let's get started." That first meeting was a blur of paperwork and questions. Samuel asked for copies of everything: the Chase Bank letter, my credit reports, screenshots of emails, even the text messages from my family. He explained the process step by step, outlining what would happen next. We filed a police report together, notified the credit bureaus, and initiated the fraud investigation with the bank. I gave a formal statement to the authorities, detailing every instance of financial abuse and manipulation I could remember. I expected to feel triumphant, but the reality was much messier. There were days I doubted myself, when the guilt crept in and whispered that maybe I was making too much of this, that family meant forgiveness, that I should just walk away. My mother left voicemails, sometimes angry, sometimes pleading, always trying to twist my resolve. Tyler alternated between silence and rage, while my father never reached out at all. I blocked their numbers, but the echoes of their voices lingered. Through it all, Samuel remained steady. He became more than my lawyer. He was a witness to my pain and a reminder that I was not crazy or selfish or ungrateful. He encouraged me to document everything, to keep a journal of my feelings and fears. "This process is hard," he told me, "but you're not alone in it anymore." The legal process was long and grueling. The bank's fraud department did its investigation, confirming that the signature on the new account had been forged. The paper trail was clear: purchases shipped to my parents' address, transactions coinciding with their holiday plans, emails sent from an IP address in Philadelphia. The evidence mounted until there was no question: my family had knowingly committed fraud in my name. Once the bank finished its investigation, the case moved to civil court. Samuel filed suit on my behalf for financial damages and emotional distress. I tried not to think about what would happen if we lost, about how my family would retaliate, or what it would mean for our already fractured relationship. Some nights, anxiety kept me awake, my mind spinning with worst-case scenarios. But every morning, I woke up determined to see it through. During those months, I leaned on the people who mattered. My friends in Boston, who had always respected my boundaries and cared about me for who I was, became my lifeline. I started spending weekends exploring the city, finding comfort in the anonymity of museums and parks. I lost myself in the quiet of the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum, letting the beauty of old canvases and marble statues remind me that the world was bigger than my pain. I reconnected with colleagues who had always respected my work, not my wallet, and shared more of myself than I ever had before. There were moments of unexpected grace: a friend dropping by with homemade soup, a stranger's smile in a bookstore, the way the city came alive with music and laughter even as winter dragged on. For the first time in years, I realized I could exist outside my family's orbit. I could build a life of my own, surrounded by people who valued my presence, not my money. As the court date approached, my anxiety intensified. I spent hours preparing with Samuel, rehearsing my statement, organizing documents, and steeling myself for the confrontation ahead. On the morning of the hearing, I dressed with care, choosing a navy blue suit that made me feel strong, like someone who deserved to be taken seriously. Samuel met me at the courthouse steps, his calm presence a steadying force. The courtroom itself was stark and intimidating, all polished wood and quiet authority. I took my seat, heart pounding, as my parents and Tyler entered, refusing to meet my eyes. Their lawyer tried to argue that it was all a misunderstanding, that I had permitted them, that this was just a family matter blown out of proportion. But the evidence told a different story, and for the first time, the truth was undeniable, laid bare for all to see. When it was my turn to speak, I told the judge about the years of giving, the endless cycle of guilt and obligation, the betrayal I felt when I discovered the fraud. I did not cry. I did not apologize. I spoke the truth plainly, and I watched as my family squirmed, as the facade they had carefully maintained began to crack. The verdict came quickly. The judge found my family guilty of fraud, ordering them to repay every dollar they had stolen. They were also sentenced to community service and fines that would sting for years to come. I felt a strange mix of sadness and relief as the judgment was read, a mourning for what could never be, and a gratitude that justice, at last, was mine. Afterward, Samuel handed me the check and squeezed my shoulder. "You did the right thing," he said quietly. "You can start over now." As I walked out of the courthouse into the crisp afternoon air, I felt lighter than I had in years. The sky was wide and blue above the city, and I breathed in deeply, letting the cold air fill my lungs. For the first time, I realized that the future was truly my own, unburdened by the weight of other people's expectations. I had taken back my life, and nothing, not guilt, not fear, not even love, would ever take it from me again. The weeks after the court verdict felt strangely empty, like standing on the edge of a wide, quiet field after a long battle. There was no dramatic celebration, no soundtrack, just a new silence, a peace so unfamiliar that it made me almost uneasy. For so long, my life had been built around crisis management, around fielding demands, apologizing for my boundaries, and waiting for the next urgent call or guilt-laden email from home. Suddenly, my phone was quiet. I had my evenings and mornings back, a sense of space in my mind that I hadn't realized was missing. I kept expecting the next shoe to drop, but all that happened was life itself, finally, returning to me. At first, the freedom felt awkward. I wandered my apartment as if I were a guest, uncertain what to do with so much time and possibility. The weight of the lawsuit, the betrayal, and the years of manipulation had left their mark. Sometimes I would wake up in the middle of the night, heart pounding, convinced I had missed some important task or that I'd find my bank account drained again by someone else's entitlement. But those moments grew less frequent, and in their place came a gentle sort of relief, a realization that I was safe. I was finally allowed to breathe. I started small. I bought fresh flowers for my kitchen and organized the bookshelves I had neglected for years. I let myself linger in the mornings, reading the news, sipping tea by the window, letting the sunlight play across the walls. For the first time since moving to Boston, I wasn't using every spare moment to work more or please someone else. I reclaimed old hobbies, sketching city scenes in my journal, listening to live jazz at a club down the block, rediscovering the simple joy of cooking for myself. Some nights I invited friends over for homemade pasta and cheap wine, and for the first time, I didn't feel like I had to impress anyone. It was during this gentle unraveling that I realized how deeply the fear and guilt had wound themselves into the fabric of my life. I would catch myself reaching for my phone, half expecting another crisis, another demand. And then I would remember, I owed nothing. The family group chat remained silent, my parents' numbers blocked, Tyler nowhere in sight. The emptiness stung at first, but then I saw it for what it was, a clearing. A space for something new. With the legal settlement behind me, I finally had the means and the courage to invest in my happiness. I renovated my kitchen, splurged on the reading nook I'd always wanted, and hung my artwork in the hallway, a visual reminder that my life was finally, fully my own. I bought tickets to Paris on a whim, deciding that if I could survive everything I'd just been through, I could handle a solo trip across the Atlantic. I remember the thrill of standing on the Pont Alexander III in the late afternoon light, the Seine shimmering beneath me, the city alive with laughter and possibility. I visited art museums, wandered through flower markets, and ate pain au chocolate in tiny cafes where no one knew my name. I even spent a rainy weekend in London, ducking into old bookshops and cozy pubs, savoring the anonymity of being just another traveler. For the first time in years, I was not anyone's daughter or sister or fixer. I was simply Julia, free to follow my whims and curiosities. Travel gave me a new perspective, not just on the world, but on myself. I realized how small my old life had become, how many choices I'd made out of obligation instead of joy. I thought about the years I had spent prioritizing everyone else, carrying the burdens that were never mine to bear, convincing myself that love meant self-erasure. In Europe, far from the familiar streets and old patterns, I discovered that I could choose differently. I could say yes to myself. When I returned home, I made changes both big and small. I joined a book club, signed up for a pottery class, and finally said yes when my friend Samantha asked if I wanted to adopt a dog from her rescue organization. That's how Maggie, a golden retriever with soulful eyes and a goofy grin, came into my life. She had been abandoned herself, and I saw in her a reflection of my journey, wary at first, slow to trust, but quick to love once given a real chance. Maggie became my daily reminder that happiness can be simple, a wagging tail at the end of a long day, a sunrise walk through the common, the companionship of someone who asks for nothing but love. She helped me create new routines, new memories. My home, once a place of anxiety and unrest, became a sanctuary filled with warmth and laughter. As spring turned to summer, I found myself reaching out, building a circle of friends who felt more like family than anyone I had ever known. These were people who saw me, who respected my boundaries, who offered support without strings attached. We hosted potluck dinners and movie nights, went hiking in the Berkshires, and celebrated birthdays with silly hats and homemade cakes. It was a chosen family, one built on trust and affection, not guilt or obligation. The biggest shift, though, was inside me. I stopped apologizing for my needs, stopped explaining my boundaries to people who had never respected them in the first place. I learned to say no without guilt, yes without fear. I stopped scanning my phone for messages that never came, stopped hoping for apologies or reconciliation that I knew would never materialize. My therapist called it reclaiming my narrative. I called it peace. As the next holiday season approached, I felt a familiar pang of anxiety, but it quickly gave way to something softer, anticipation, even excitement. Instead of bracing myself for another round of disappointment and manipulation, I planned my celebration. I invited friends and neighbors, filled my living room with fairy lights and the scent of cinnamon, and set the table with dishes that made me smile. Maggie, in her ridiculous red bow, greeted each guest with enthusiasm, and the room filled with laughter, music, and easy conversation. I looked around at the people I had chosen, friends from work, neighbors from down the hall, even my therapist, who had become more like a mentor. These were the people who had seen me at my lowest and still showed up. The family I had always wanted, built not from blood, but from kindness and honesty and joy. For the first time in my life, I did not dread the holidays. I felt truly present, alive in a way I hadn't been since I was a child. There was no undercurrent of anxiety, no need to prove my worth or buy affection. I was enough, just as I was, surrounded by people who valued me for me. Sometimes, late at night, I still thought about my parents and Tyler. There was grief, of course, a mourning for the family I wished I'd had, for the love that had been conditional and transactional. But the guilt and fear that had once defined me were gone, replaced by something sturdier, acceptance, and even gratitude. I was grateful for the lessons, for the resilience I had built, for the chance to start over. My story isn't about loss, not really. It's about finding myself again, about carving out a life that feels authentic and joyful and whole. I had lost a family, yes, but I had gained a self, a woman who could choose her happiness, stand in her truth, and surround herself with love that was freely given. On the night of my holiday gathering, as the last guests left and Maggie curled up beside me on the sofa, I realized I was no longer waiting for someone else's approval. I was, finally, free. I wouldn't trade that freedom for anything in the world.